welcome to our panel. So we'll skip the intro since we've already been introduced really well, and looking forward to a really exciting discussion today on investment trends and regulatory challenges as well, or the regulatory landscape. So start off the question, last year was a pretty banner year for crypto, and it's when a lot of people got really excited about blockchain and about crypto. What I want to talk about is what you think is going to be particularly exciting this year in terms of standout opportunities. I'll have each of you answer, and then I'll throw in my 2 cents as well. Ken?
So my intro didn't actually say I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little different from everyone else here on the panel. So I think probably the things that I will say are pretty similar to some of these others, entrepreneurs who are closer, quite frankly, to the startup scene. I tend to work with larger companies, but supply chain, pharma, we all discussed before, as well as FinTech is certainly some areas where I would certainly pay attention.
Excellent. I think that served as a disclaimer as well.
So I think that a lot of the startups have had their awakening and they've started to really digest what blockchain is. But I think that this is starting to ooze into corporations, and it's fascinating with some of the calls that I've been receiving. Last year, I did a huge study of corporations, and I asked them, what are your policies on blockchain? What are your policies on crypto? And I did this in the FinTech space, because I'm a FinTech gal. And I had a lot of people laugh. I had a lot of people say, we're not doing that. A lot of people call me back and say, oh yeah, we do have 1 or 2 people working on that. But I think this is the year that people are going to really start to dig their teeth in from a corporate side.
I completely agree.
I think blockchain is here to stay, and in fact I feel the old question of is it in the database will be replaced by is it on the blockchain, which fundamentally means that you're going to see every industry adopt blockchain one after the other, and that's a trend we're going to see. And starting with manufacturing or supply chain or payments, crypto is obviously driving a lot of this, but I think blockchain is now getting out of the crypto world and expanding into other industries. And going into 2019, you will see that trend only growing from here.
So I happen to agree with that. I think that in terms of trends, I think a lot of what we've seen in the past has been focusing on the crypto, but a lot of people forget that blockchain is an actual technology and can be deployed to solve some fundamental problems. And those of you who remember the .com days or early cloud days know that a lot of the adoption of that technology happened in enterprise. And so you just heard a magnificent panel on enterprise blockchain. So I think I'm a big proponent of that same belief, saying, a lot of traction this year in particular in the enterprise, looking at solving problems in supply chain or in provenance or audit trail or manufacturing. These are some of the low-hanging fruits, I would say, of how people are deploying things. So that kind of brings me to the next question. What are some of the exciting things or interesting things you're seeing on the horizon this year that may have some hurdles? And those hurdles can be regulatory, they can be any other type of technical hurdle. What do you see happening out there?
So,
either way.
Lawyers are always a hurdle, right?
It starts.
But jokes apart, I actually believe that the adoption of any new blockchain-based platform has to go through legal approval and legal understanding, because a lot of the people don't know when they are even investing in ICOs or investing in blockchain-based companies, they don't know what they're getting into. So I strongly suggest them to go through legal advice. This is generically true, but for blockchain and ICO-based companies, I think it's critical. So that is one step to make sure you cover that. Now on the technology side, we all talk about blockchain, but today blockchain exists as a public platform applied to the crypto world. And now when it is going to graduate from there and get into the enterprise space, we're talking of a permissioned blockchain, and a whole new technology architecture needs to be developed to enable that. And it still remains to be seen how that's how the existing blockchain framework will scale to adopt at the enterprise level. And I also feel from a technological standpoint, yes, blockchain is all about edge, and that's brilliant. It's decentralized, but you will still have some level of central authority as a split architecture in the permissioned private blockchain era to make sure data is getting stored and trusted beyond just the edge node. So there is a lot of technology that needs to be developed for blockchain to get adoption beyond the crypto space, besides the legal hurdle I talked about.
So I have two challenges, and the first is the number of developers that are available for projects. Right now in the Valley, there are 14 job openings for every blockchain developer. So it's really hard to find really smart people that can help with projects. And as the corporates wake up, that is going, I would say in about 18 months, there's going to be over 100 job openings for every developer. So that's part one. And the second is the regulatory environment. And so, yesterday there was a class action against Ripple, so the floodgates are opening. And the DAO report that came out July 25th last year had some really profound things that happened. It's SEC 81207. So those of you that have read it, congratulations, but if you haven't read it yet, you should, because the floodgates are opening up and the SEC is right behind. I've been hearing folks at the SEC have been very much reading what's happening with that class action lawsuit. So what it's saying is that the Ripple token is unregistered. So that's just, they're the poster child, and you know, it's too bad because Brad Garlinghouse has done a really great job, but they will be put to a different standard because they had such a meteoric rise.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of the retrospect, because I think this is something that a lot of people may not realize, is that it's not just going forward what gets done, but the SEC is scrutinizing what's already happened. And so hence some of you may have heard of the subpoenas that have happened. And so, you know, we, my partner and myself, we were advising a number of companies in the healthcare space. And, you know, we had been working with them through the pre-sale process all the way up till February. And February came around and suddenly things changed because the SEC had their viewpoints and things changed, and these two companies decided to, well, think about things a little bit more. So I think that, you know, in hindsight, I'm almost glad that things didn't move forward, because I know myself in an advisory capacity, I'd be thinking about, well, would I be next, you know, trying to explain my actions or my advisements to companies. And so I think going forward is just as important in terms of dealing with on the regulatory side as what has happened.
And then also the VCs that I've been speaking with are very concerned about holding on to tokens. A lot of times when they get the tokens, they want to get rid of them as fast as possible because they don't want to have that personal unlimited liability in holding those tokens that are unregistered securities.
Right, that's a good point. Ken, did you have a comment on that?
Sure, actually, maybe I want to flip something that Sanjit said on its head and point out that, you know, when you have, this is not an attack, by the way.
I'm ready by you.
I'm sure he's always ready. If you have technological challenges, right, those result in a requirement to create standards, right? And Sanjit mentioned, you know, he's sitting right over there on the last panel, he correctly mentioned, you know, there's going to be a big need for everyone to be using similar standards. And with these standards come additional sort of legal considerations, right? So people who are familiar with sort of smartphone, you know, wireless technologies, things like that, those standards, you know, there are a lot of patents involved, a lot of standard essential patents, and a lot of antitrust concerns. So I think this is something that, again, even though, notwithstanding that blockchain is itself open source, there are patents out there. And that's another thing to consider, and how that could affect more long-term the regulatory landscape.
But Ken, this is ICO and blockchain space is so new.
Yeah.
How relevant are the existing patents in what is actually happening in this space today?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean,
should we throw all those patents out?
I'm sure if you ask most of the software developers here, they'll say yes, right? But you know, I'm a lawyer, so I'm not gonna opine on that. I do think that there probably are some you know, validity issues with a lot of these patents under U.S. patent law. But remember, you know, patents are international. So just because the United States says, Supreme Court says, you know, these patents, these would not be valid, I don't know what Germany would say. I don't know what China would say or Japan would say. So I think these are things we definitely have to keep in mind and not lose sight of.
I think if I may just add, I think the reality is for blockchain, the genie is out.
Yeah.
And if one country tries to stop it, whether it is blockchain or ICOs, another country will take opportunity and say, hey, it's legalized here, come here.
Sure.
And hence the innovation will start going from country X to country Y, but you cannot stop the blockchain train at this point.
And I mean, just to pick up on that, I mean, China has said, I think everyone is aware, cryptocurrencies no, right? But blockchain as a technology, I'm sure we talked before about data sovereignty.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that's one of their cornerstones. So as a technology, I think they're very interested, right?
They are creating I've heard even $100 billion blockchain fund, not ICO.
There you go.
Blockchain fund. Mm-hmm. So there is recognition from different countries on how powerful blockchain as a technology is, and they want to bring that to e-governance, security of data, every aspect of consumers that is touched today by data. Yeah. Because there is no other way to bring trust among untrusted parties except blockchain.
So one thing that I wanted to add, a couple of things. So one is I wanted to go back half a step to what Maryanne had brought about in terms of what's happening with Ripple, for example, because based on the regulatory shifts that we've been seeing, particularly since February, which sort of set the shock wave, if you will, here in the US, what we've seen in ICO activity, for example, clearly investments in the ICO space has been never hotter than today. But if you look at the numbers, the US has not had a huge role to play in overall numbers. It's really come from out of the country. So it's back to Maryanne's question, Maryanne's point as well as Sanjit's point. I think we're seeing a lot of activity elsewhere in the world. This is one of the things that's actually exciting about blockchain, and that innovation can happen really anywhere. What are you seeing as some of the challenges based on the current rulings, or not really rulings, but current viewpoints, if you will, exercised by the SEC? What are you seeing as hurdles in the regulatory landscape based, for ICOs, and how will it affect that, you think, this year?
Well, it's no surprise, based on the Facebook hearings, that our legislators really don't understand technology. So I think it's really important for those of us that do understand the technology to reach out and explain it, and also provide a path where the technology can go. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a lot of folks go outside of the U.S. to do their ICOs and really geo-fence the U.S. investors out of the market. So that's part one. And then part two, we're also starting to see folks register the ICOs, which I think is a prudent way to go forward.
Right. Well, I think what I want to add to that is those countries like Switzerland, for example, who have clearer guidelines on things, are going to have a lot more projects that are going to be based out of Switzerland, precisely because of that clarity. I think there's a lack of clarity still in terms of how things are going down here. I have my own personal opinions on security tokens versus utility tokens. We talked a little bit earlier as a group, but I think there's going to be some challenges in terms of how do you register it as a security, but then if you have real utility value in the token, how do you handle that? You're going to be a little bit of both, actually.
And then the other thing that happens is that a lot of the ICOs are raising, in essence, a Series D type amount of money, which really they should be doing like a seed or even a pre-seed amount, because they don't even have a line of code written. So, for those of us that provide adult supervision to a lot of these startups, from the CPAs that I work with, they're really very uncomfortable with the amount that's raised, and there's not enough controls or treasury management even in the companies to have that framework. So
although you have to say that the SEC, for example, has made it quite clear, well, the rules definitely have changed to the point where in order to be at token distribution, you really have to have a product. So the days last year of releasing something without a single line of code having been written, I think those are behind us. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny. There are people going to be wanting to try to do things, but it really is, you have to get to mainnet first, and so to be there, you really have to have product product. That's what we're seeing. So what do you want to comment on that?
Effectively, ICOs today are in La La Land. There is no regulation. There is very little understanding of what investors are getting into and what product will come out and what will be the value of that product and what they're getting finally in return when or if an exit happens. And hence, in this chaos, there is going to be a lot of money that will go down the drain. And I think once that happens, we'll see the reality sink in on ICOs, on what is investable, what is not investable, and what really will stand up in the over time as something valuable. Otherwise, people are investing into ICOs of startups that otherwise would not get any kind of funding.
So Ken, do you want to have any additional comments on that?
Yeah, I would just say, before you invest, everyone recommends you do due diligence.
Yeah.
Hire a good lawyer. Maybe that's a tip.
Hire Ken to do your due diligence. I mean, I think, I'll throw a little bit of hindsight 2020 in a way, but I mean, you think about the dot-com boom days when a lot of people raised a lot of money on an idea on a napkin. I mean, this is a proverbial sort of anecdotal sort of phrase, if you will, from those times. But I think the idea of raising something on an idea on a napkin, that's very similar to what we saw happen last year. I happen to think that this year there's been a bit of a sobering up. A lot more due diligence that's being required, a lot more expectation that you will actually have product by the time you distribute your token. And then also the due diligence aspect. I mean, I think anybody that invested in something without really reading the white paper, about scrutinizing, well, who is this team? Are they capable of implementing something? Even if it is something transformative and something brand new, you still have to kind of gauge who the team is behind all of this. And I think a lot of people just didn't do that last year. Are there any other sorts of interesting kind of projects or sectors that you're seeing that are really exciting, but are that may take a while in terms of deployment, but really exciting to talk about?
I think we are seeing a lot of blockchain projects in supply chain, where, for example, you could implement blockchain on top of a sensor platform. And as a drug is manufactured and goes through the whole supply chain process, you can monitor the drug, what temperature it was put into, et cetera, and provide that data as ground truth to the end consumer when he or she is buying that in Walgreens. That's one. The other thing that is going to be, I think, really disruptive in the world of blockchain is smart contracts. Today what happens, let's use the example of Walmart. When Walmart has to pay its contractors, it has some metrics. It says, hey, if you fulfill these metrics, I'll pay you. So what the vendors do is they hire services people to get that data and send that data to Walmart contract managers, and then Walmart people manually look at it and say, yeah, it is within the range, so I'll pay you. All of that can be automated via blockchain plus smart contracts. And look at the level of efficiency we can bring to supply chain by implementing blockchain plus smart contracts. And you will automate payments between Walmart, and Walmart is just an example here, between Walmart and vendors. You will bring efficiency, you'll drive actually costs down for the end user as well. So that is a whole new level of efficiency that blockchain is enabling via smart contracts. And we think supply chain is one area where it's going to go. Manufacturing is another area where it will go, and so on. And payment transfers. If you do international money transfer, why do you have to pay that fee? If I send $100, why doesn't my friend or family member get $100 over there? All of that. The intermediary is actually the person at highest risk of losing his or her job in the world of blockchain and smart contracts.
Yeah, I agree with you with regards to supply chain management. IBM brought me into a project that's taking wine shipments from Napa and authenticating the wine all the way into China, and now they're doing pharmaceuticals. What's also interesting are social impact types of endeavors that are using the blockchain. For example, with looking at identity and how your identity is maintained. Also, I'm involved in an advertising project on blockchain where the data that you put out is actually owned by you, so that advertisers will need to pay you in order for them to use your data, because advertisers know more about you than anyone else in the world.
I can pick up on that. I think that GDPR coming online, very soon, means privacy is top of mind for basically everybody, at least all big companies. And it's interesting how blockchain can really put into effect the idea of each person owns their own data, right? Because it's easy to say that, right? But if Google has all our data, and Google's a client, so nothing wrong with Google, but if Google has all our data, right, then practically speaking, I don't have control over all my own data. Maybe I'm okay with that, but under European privacy law, I should be the one to decide, and right now, technically speaking, it's just not possible.
So I'll add to that. I also work heavily in healthcare, and one of the big things that I'm seeing is the opportunity using blockchain and encryption technology to bring about data sovereignty in the healthcare space. So i.e. like what Ken was talking about in terms of the person owning his or her own data, being able to decide where you want to opt in that data or not. The idea of a continuous patient health record, for example, which never before really has been possible, is I think at our hand. It may not be easily deployed right away, but I think that we are definitely seeing that blockchain has the capability to deliver that kind of thing without compromising privacy. So if you're talking about particular encryption techniques like ZKP, for example, then you're able to obfuscate parts of the data, and you're able to execute selective disclosure of data. So I think a lot of that identity, privacy, that is so central to blockchain, I think has some exciting applications within healthcare. In closing, because I think we're going to be running out of time fairly soon, did you want to share any other thoughts in terms of what regulatory landscape is going to look like this year going forward? Are we going to hear more out of the SEC, do you think, or any other further clarity that's going to be lent to the space?
I think the SEC is just getting started.
Yeah.
I think the governments are on a big learning curve here. Not just in the US, outside as well. And it's going to take them a while to understand what is happening and get a grasp of it and make the rules. And I agree, the regulators do not understand technology in general, but they are the ones who are making the decisions on what regulations to follow, to pass. So there is going to be an education for regulators wave that we will see in blockchain and ICO space. That's one. And secondly, I think despite the hurdles on regulatory side, legal side, etc., blockchain is here to stay. I would actually categorize blockchain as the fourth revolution after steam engine, after the industrial revolution, after IT. It's the world of blockchain. That's how disruptive it will be. But it's going to take time for it to proliferate across mankind.
I'll just add that I think blockchain's technology. So the way that you use it will require different regulations, right? So if you're using it in healthcare, then healthcare regulations will come into play. If you're using it, in cryptocurrency, then cryptocurrency-related regulations will come into play. But one thing I think is really interesting is that, like I said earlier with privacy, it can also be a technology that can be used to regulate. So instead of regulating the technology, it's a tool to regulate data, for example. So
that's a good point.
Ken, if you were not a lawyer, would you say the same thing?
I think I would, but I don't know. That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
Clearly, we have a panel of believers here. We happen to be pretty bullish on blockchain, and I personally am very bullish on blockchain, not without challenges. And like Ken pointed out, each sector is going to have its own hurdles or adoption curves, if you will. But I think starting from maybe enterprise this year, which I think is going to be really exciting this year, to see how not just supply chain, but management of data data, shareability of data, all of these things I think are very exciting, and I think it's going to be much more easily implemented first in enterprise than we are seeing in maybe the ICO space. I think apps are going to come a little bit later on, once we've achieved some measure of scalability and infrastructure. Great. I think this is a wrap for the panel. Did we have any questions? I don't know if we have time for any questions. Are we out of time? We're out of time.
Out of time.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.